So, once the British Grand Prix had concluded, and the latest episode of the Max Verstappen podcast had finished, we had a week off before a return to action, with all 10 teams and nearly all 20 drivers making the trip to round 11, as the F1 circus made its way to Hungary and more specifically the Hungaroring, a track where Lewis Hamilton is rumoured to still be trying to pass Fernando Alonso. Coming into the weekend, and after having finally decided to bring 2 quick cars and 2 quick drivers to a race for the first time in 10 years, McLaren looked good, as they jumped up to P5 in the standings, overtaking Alpine, with their sights set on the likes of Ferrari up ahead in the battle for second. And to be honest, if Ferrari keep deciding to get rid of points at the same rate Chelsea are getting rid of players, well then it won't be too long before McLaren are there. Hey guys, it's Taran and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 11 in Hungary. Before getting into the video, as always, just want to give you a quick reminder that if you do end up enjoying it, to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more content. Also, as you may be able to tell, I'm a little bit ill at the moment. I've somehow managed to catch a cold in the middle of summer, but hey, what can you do? Now, with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2023 Hungarian Grand Prix. So the big news between races was of course that Daniel Ricciardo would be back on the F1 grid, replacing Nick de Vries after Red Bull and AlphaTauri decided that he wasn't doing a good enough job. Though given Nick's history and ties to Mercedes, I'm pretty sure that decision was made before the season even started. For F1 fans though, it's exciting to see him back on the grid, bringing his personality and overall joy to the sport. I could say bringing pace to the team, but let's be honest, just getting out of Q1 is a real achievement for that AlphaTauri car. Meanwhile, over at the big boy team, and Max Verstappen was busy spending his time off doing some sim racing. Well, that was until he went full Dan Ticktum, cut 3 corners to plough into someone else and take them both out of the race. I feel like I've seen this somewhere before. And finally, sticking with the Red Bulls and the team that was set to bring upgrades to Hungary with changes to the side pods, meaning Christian Horner and friends have the opportunity to pull the best prank ever by bringing out the zero pods and still winning the race. Into FP1 with the first on-track action since Silverstone, someone eager to turn a corner was Sergio Perez, who looked absolutely rapid through the first 4 corners, and then came turn 5, where Checo wasted absolutely no time in sending his Red Bull spinning off the track and into the barriers, destroying the front left of his upgraded car for the weekend, along with emotionally traumatising this young child, leaving him in tears. That or he's just doing his best impersonation of being a Ferrari fan. I know that Christian Horner has said Checo will be at Red Bull for next year and Checo has a contract for 2024, but given Red Bull contracts don't seem to be worth the paper they're written on, well, Checo really is doing his best to make the team, well, pull a Red Bull. This incident did bring out the red flag, along with the stampede to then get out of the pits before the rain came down. However, it resulted in the entire grid channeling their inner Ferrari as the cars ended up out in the rain on the slick tyres, leading to Valtteri Bottas practicing his ballet, pirouetting at the exit of turn 12 with his Alfa ending up on the grass. And sadly for us fans, given that the prime British summertime had decided to show up, it sent everyone back into the garage. But with 20 minutes to go and the rain easing up, cars were headed back out, and then straight back in again, as Carlos Sainz spun his car into the barrier with only some minor front wing damage, but got away with it mostly, until he got beached on the curb trying to rejoin. Into FP2, and Sergio Perez was still trying his best to make life as hard as possible, this time locking up down into turn 1, creating a flat spot so big it rivals the size of Christian Horner's ego. Over in the pit lane, and Charles Leclerc was forced to slow down and slot in behind the Alpine leaving in front of him. To be fair, if Ferrari get their way come Sunday, he'll probably somehow end up behind the Alpine anyway. But for action, that was about it, meaning that for entertainment, coverage quite literally turned to a 12-year-old taking the mick out of the state of Ted's notebook. Into FP3, and for favourite Max Verstappen, things weren't all plain sailing, as despite being in the fastest car throughout Saturday morning, well,
It's unbelievable.
over at Ferrari, and Charles Leclerc went exploring the runoff at the exit of turn 4, pretty sure he headed off there in search of a new strategy team. And then over at AlphaTauri, Daniel Ricciardo was getting as many practice starts in as he could, clearly so excited to be back that he forgot he was joining a live racetrack and almost ran into the back of Zhou Guanyu ahead of him. Now onto qualifying and the new format being tested for this weekend, with hard compound tyres in Q1, mediums being in use for Q2, and then softs as usual in the top 10 shootout in Q3. But with the hards we started, and after the first runs it wasn't looking good for Mercedes, more specifically George Russell, who had one final chance to set a time to get him out of the session given he was sat in the drop zone.
I'm going to do what's called a pro gamer move.
He did not get out the drop zone, pulling a Sergio Perez and qualifying 18th. Over at AlphaTauri, and Daniel Ricciardo was not only getting out of Q1, but out-qualifying teammate Tsunoda. So Yuki, best be watching your back given that, well, you drive for Red Bull. Into Q2 then, and the early pressure was on Max Verstappen, who after going on a date with everyone's least favourite thing, track limits, needed to set a time with 3 minutes left. He did that and was safely through to the top 10. Not the case, however, for Lance Stroll, who continues to remind us all round after round the real reason he's in F1.
That is cash. Want that team with that is cash.
As the Canadian was knocked out in P14, having been out-qualified by, well, literally everybody in the session other than Gasly with his deleted lap time. Also disappointed in Q2 was the Spaniard Carlos Sainz, no, not because he drives for Ferrari, but because he was knocked out by just 0.02 of a second.
What for? What can we tell him? What for? Do we know what for?
Into Q3 then, and for the first time in what feels like a century, we had Sergio Perez involved. Now involved doesn't mean making an impact, as he slotted in P9 behind Alonso. Up ahead of those and separating the early season frauds from the top runners was a strange group to say the least, consisting of both Alfa Romeos.
What?
But onto the top 3, and in third place was Lando Norris as he continued McLaren's good run. And with just one car to cross the line, it was Max Verstappen on provisional pole, only to be displaced by Lewis Hamilton by 0.03 of a second, taking his 104th pole 500 days after his 103rd. On to Sunday, and the first place return for Lewis Hamilton lasted all of about 10 metres, as Max Verstappen made his way up the inside to take the lead down into turn 1, the pair managing to refrain from driving into each other for a change. However, for Hamilton, that P2 very quickly became P3 and then P4, as Oscar Piastri took his McLaren up the inside of 1 and Lando Norris went round the outside of the Mercedes at turn 2. But as it turned out, that still wasn't the worst start, which went to Zhou Guanyu, as the Chinese driver elected to, well, not start the race until about half the grid had passed him. But the problems didn't end there. Oh no, as Zhou had clearly been taking tips from his teammate Valtteri and he executed the perfect strike down into turn 1, braking too late and rear-ending Ricciardo, who then hit Ocon, who then mounted Gasly, leaving both Alpines to head to the pit lane and retire from the race. Surely though for Alfa Romeo it couldn't get any worse than that. Oh yes, it could. As with a bad start for Bottas also, and evasive action from the collision caused by Zhou, he had dropped down in the order too, meaning that after just a few laps, the Alfa Romeos were, well, not in 5th and 7th anymore. At the back end of the points, and a little battle had emerged between Sergio Perez and Fernando Alonso, as after a few laps of Checo trying, he was up the inside and finally ahead of Fernando up into P7. Meanwhile, over at Ferrari, and given their inability to make a single correct decision, Carlos Sainz was taking matters into his own hands, telling the team exactly what to do regarding his pit stops, and then following through on his message by coming in to avoid being overtaken by Perez. However, for Ferrari, getting it right with one car was the limit of their capabilities, as Leclerc had a pit stop so slow you may as well call it Nick de Vries, which dropped him behind both Sainz and Stroll. Meanwhile, in the top 4, and Lewis Hamilton was triggering the start of the stops, coming out ahead of Ricciardo with the F1 graphics on smoke when it came to estimating the pace of that AlphaTauri. That stop from Hamilton caused the McLarens to come in and cover him off, with the pair pitting on consecutive laps. And with a fast outlap for Norris, the pair was side by side into turn 1, with Lando going around the outside to take P2. Further back, and in the fight for P5, it was Russell followed by Sainz, followed by Perez and then Leclerc, which quickly became Russell then Perez as Checo went up the inside of Sainz into turn 1 with the elbows out to take the place. And next lap it was the turn of George Russell, with Russell trying to hold it round the outside, and had he done so any longer he'd have launched Checo into the grandstands. However, with Perez getting by, he was then told to chase down Hamilton, and 10 laps later, on lap 41, Sergio had reeled Lewis into DRS range, with Checo getting alongside out of the first turn, but Lewis defending the inside into the next one to keep hold of 4th, which meant that next lap Sergio was in along with Piastri, who was being caught by both Hamilton and Perez. And so for Checo, his next task was now to overtake Oscar, with Piastri leaving just enough room down at turn 1 and Checo leaving, well, not quite so much room round turn 2. Clearly been taking tips from Max there. Sadly for Piastri, that wasn't the end of him losing places, as a few laps later Lewis Hamilton on his fresher mediums had caught up and made the pass down into the first turn. Over at Ferrari, and it seemed that those pesky pit stops were still haunting them, as Charles Leclerc had received a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane, which meant that when George Russell overtook Carlos Sainz for 7th, he was pretty much then going to be elevated to 6th as well. But back up at the front, and it was total domination from Max Verstappen, as he came home to win by over 30 seconds to Norris in 2nd and then Checo in 3rd. But anyways, that is all for now. Thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed, do make sure to give it a thumbs up and get yourself subscribed. But until next time, take care.